Pecans. They're ripe now, and these were one of the most important foods for natives of Texas historically. And there's still an annual celebration of the pecan harvest practiced by American Indians in Texas, and celebrations at this time likely go for thousands of years. Possibly only mesquite exceeds importance as far as edible wild plants eaten by natives in Texas. So pecans have 73% fats, 10% protein, and 13% carbs, making them a caloric powerhouse. They're also excellent sources of copper, manganese, zinc, and magnesium, and moderate sources of iron and potassium. Pecan oil has good oxidative stability, and pecan nut consumption can decrease total cholesterol. Pecans are rich in healthy fats such as linoleic and oleic acids, polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats, polyphenolic compounds such as epigallocatechin gallate, which is an antioxidant found in green tea, and tocopherols like vitamin E, making them very beneficial to cardiovascular health, obesity management, oxidative stress reduction, and combating metabolic disease. And these figures are from commercial pecans, and wild pecans are slightly smaller on average and may contain somewhat lower macronutrient levels, but their mineral, vitamin, antioxidant, and lipid profiles are essentially the same. Pecan nuts were highly prized by the Asinai, Caddo, Sanís, Comanche, Karankawa, Mexican Kickapoo, Kiowa, Nabadachi, Natchitoches, Nazonis, and Osage, other natives and folk in northern Mexico, and Texians. They were eaten in large quantities and were stored for winter use, and pecans were traded by natives and among Texians, and the pecan trade was an early industry in central Texas. So carya, or hickory, species in general were an important food source for indigenous peoples of the eastern U.S., with nuts being eaten and stored in great quantities throughout the southeast, according to early Spanish expeditions. Hickory nuts were also eaten by the Cherokee, Choctaw, Dakota, Haudenosaunee, Menominee, Meskwaki, Omaha, Ojibwe, Pawnee, Ponca, Forest, Potawatomi, Quapaw, and Winnebago, as well as by indigenous peoples of all regions of North America where carya species occur. Other species eaten include Carya alba, Carya cordiformis, Carya lacinosa, and Carya ovata. So in one account, natives of south central Texas in 1709 were using nuts for food for the greater part of the year. Of the various kinds of nuts eaten, all of them are more tasty and palatable than those of Castile, although they are longer and thinner. This is likely in reference to Carya illinoinensis pecan, a common wild species in the area, but it may have also included Carya texana. Large quantities of the whole nuts were stored in underground caches by these peoples, and they were very skillful at shelling them, taking the kernels out whole. And the shelled nuts were stored in small sacks made of leather for the purpose, and were sometimes also kept threaded on long strings. Hickory nuts were eaten plain in soups with honey mixed with cornmeal for bread, as mush with beans or berries, or processed into oil. Nut milk was also made. Hickory nuts were commonly made into oil by the Cherokee, Choctaw, Haudenosaunee, and Southeast natives in general, and the general method of oil extraction was to place the nuts in small, shallow cavities pecked into a large flat anvil stone and then strike them with a hammer stone. Sometimes this was done with multiple anvil cavities, so up to 5 or more nuts could be cracked in a single blow. And without separating the nut meat from the shells, the cracked nuts were boiled, and the oil that rose to the top was skimmed off and stored in earthenware jars. And this oil was used for cooking, especially in corn cakes. It was also used as a medium for paints, for preserving leather, for skin and hair care, and for preserving and polishing various implements such as bows. And 100 pounds of nuts yielded 154 ounces of oil. The Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, they ground the nuts and boiled the meal. They skimmed off the oil, boiled it separately, likely to remove the water remaining, and then salted it for use in bread, potatoes, squash, and other foods. And that leftover nut meat, it was often seasoned and mixed with mashed potatoes or corn pudding. In another account, the Haudenosaunee cracked the nuts on a special small stone boulders or slabs, and each stone had a small depression pecked into it to hold the nut in place as it was cracked with another stone. They also ground the whole nuts, shells and all, in a large wood mortar. And the meal was mixed with water, allowing the shells to sink to the bottom. And this upper portion of milky water, nut milk, was drunk, being called Paco Hicora or Pata Hicorea. And that's a Lenape word, possibly the origin of the word hickory. The Seneca mixed dried hickory nut meal with pulverized dried bear or deer meat, and this mixture was boiled and used as a baby food. The Choctaw extracted oil by parching the nuts first, and then grinding them into a fine meal. And this meal was boiled for 1 to 1.5 hours, after which the oil was strained off and the remaining solids were discarded. This oil was used for cooking. The Cherokee ground the nuts, shells and all, in a large mortar, and this meal was placed in a container with water, and the oil that rose to the top was skimmed off. And in this account, heat may have been applied, but it wasn't mentioned. This hickory oil, called canuchi, was used as a cooking oil and to make cornbread. I've also heard canuchi being used to refer to hickory nut milk. So the leaves can also be used for tea. I make the leaves into tea often, and I find it tastes pretty good. And this pecan leaf tea was favored by the Mexican Kickapoo. So pecan, or Carya illinoinensis, is the only commonly occurring Carya species in Travis County, in my area, Central Texas. So Carya texana is also present here, but it's very rare. And pecan has the best nuts in the entire genus because it has these thin shells and plenty of nut meat. Other hickory nuts are harder to crack and extract this nut meat. So pecan trees look very similar to walnut trees, specifically Juglans major or Juglans nigra, especially the foliage, but they can be distinguished by smell actually. So the scent of crushed pecan leaves is distinctly fragrant, although this can only be judged by personal experience, so I recommend trying it, sniffing both pecan and walnut leaves and comparing the fragrance. Juglans or walnut species typically have more leaflets than hickory Carya, although there's some overlap in the numbers. Pecan trees have 9 to 17 leaflets, while the 3 walnut species in Austin have 7 to 25, with Juglans microcarpa having the most, Juglans major the fewest. So the best characteristic for distinguishing the non-reproductive parts of Carya and Juglans can be seen by splitting the twigs lengthwise. So Carya twig pith is solid and homogeneous, whereas Juglans pith is chambered, exhibiting lines of separation. And the fruits can be easily distinguished. Pecan holes are long, oblong, and divided into 4 segments, whereas walnut holes are green, globular, and unsegmented. Similar to acorns, pecans, they're difficult to gather from the floor of an intact forest where the leaf litter and debris obscures them. But fortunately, like oaks, pecans are very popular landscaping plants, especially in Austin. So the grounds beneath them are often cleared, making them easy to gather. I also like to gather pecans directly from the trees. And so as they ripen, the green holes, they begin to split open, revealing pecans that have yet to drop. And so during this brief period, about early October, it's very easy to collect nuts directly from the branches. And I often bring a long hooked stick that I use to pull down branches full of nuts. I gather mini pecans while they're still in their green holes. But many of these actually turn out to be duds, or pecans that the tree aborted during development, and they're essentially empty shells. And there's 2 types of duds. One's easily identifiable with a smaller hole that's often brown or discolored. And the other type has a hole similar to a ripe, healthy pecan, but they never split open. So these can be detected by lack of hole splitting, but more importantly, the slightly lighter weight. So I sometimes collect these duds accidentally, and I really can only identify them if they never split open, or even then sometimes they can be fine, but you can tell by the lighter weight. They just have like a little bit of shriveled, dry, and bitter tissue, if anything. So I slip off the green holes, which can be used for a dark brown dye, and then I usually wash the pecans sometimes by putting them in a tub of water and scrubbing them with wads of grass. And I dry them completely before long-term storage in the shells. To eat them, I crack the shells with the point upward, is the best way, with a rock on an anvil stone, and then I tease out the nut meat by hand or with a long antler bone pick. In the field, I crack pecans with my teeth, but I don't recommend doing that, or by just pressing 2 together in my palm until they break. And I ate the nut meat plain or in various dishes, desserts, or smoothies. So I usually sort out the smallest grade of pecans from the batch to make oil. And I crush these in my large wooden mortar and pestle and reduce it to a coarse meal. And I boil this meal for a while, causing the oil to separate. And then I let the decoction cool and then strain it through a cloth. So I put a cotton cloth and a colander and then pour the decoction and hot meal into it. And then I twist up the sides of the cloth to seal it and squeeze the bundle to force out the rest of the water and oil from the meal. And sometimes I put this strained and pressed pecan meal back into the pot of water and reboil it to extract the maximum amount of oil. but the first batch will extract most of it. And this oil can be skimmed off the top of the strained liquid, but some water will be included. And this extra water can be cooked off by simmering it at a low temperature. Another way to separate the oil from the water is to freeze it. So once the water freezes, the oil can just be cleanly poured off the ice. And this oil, if water-free, can last at least a year without spoiling. That's how long this has lasted, especially if refrigerated. And I use pecan oil in place of any cooking oil or fat. It's an excellent replacement for butter in recipes. It also makes a high-quality wood sealant. It can be used to moisturize skin, as a carrier oil for an extract of American beautyberry, for mosquito repellent, or for countless other purposes. But this entire script is straight from my book, Native Food Plants of Texas, an Austin Forager's Guide based on indigenous knowledge, Cyrus Harp. So check the links in the description or in my bio to get this unique book. It's the first foraging book in Texas based on indigenous knowledge, and one of the only foraging books around based on indigenous knowledge. And I worked many years on bringing it all to you. It's got a lot of color photos and a lot of nutritional information about the plants and all of the historical methods of gathering and processing these foods. All right, y'all, take it easy.